Ladies and gentlemen, I think I have just officially found my favorite cold steel knife to date. I've handled a lot of cold steels, and there's so many models out there from that company that I absolutely love, but honestly, I genuinely believe this is my favorite one so far. But before we get into the nitty-gritties of this, feel free to subscribe, hit that little bell notification if you do not want to miss weekly knife and gun videos. Enter the cold steel Mayhem. This is an absolute beast. Not only do I absolutely love the way it looks, I love the size of it. It's very comparable to a lot of the other XL size cold steel knives. You know, the Espada, the Raja, the Holdout, Counterpoint, the XL Voyager, etc. This one, not only do I absolutely love the looks of, it's extremely broad, and instead of wearing the usual triad lock we're used to seeing, we have the new Atlas lock instead. It's the first giant knife from cold steel that I know of that is wearing this new locking mechanism, which honestly I think is also my favorite locking mechanism, not just from cold steel, but from any knife company. This is easily my favorite locking mechanism. I'm going to explain all the details in this video. But first, as always, let's just get our specs out of the way. According to BladeHQ.com, because currently, as of early mid-2024, as I'm filming this right now, cold steel doesn't have the specs listed. Retails at $349.99, woo! But you can get these for around the $240 range, and occasionally on certain websites, including Amazon, you can see these go on sale for around $140. That's what's happening right now as I'm filming this. I don't know how regular that's going to be as the months go by, but that's a good deal. If you can grab it for that, grab it. But if not, you're going to have to spend a little over $200. Overall length is 13.5 inches, so over a foot long. Damn. Blade length is a full 6 inches on the nose. The cutting edge itself, however, is 5.38 inches, and the blade's thickness is 0.17 inches. AUS 10A blade still on there. Looks like we have a two-tone satin finish. Blade HQ is saying it's a clip point. Some people call it a cleaver. I certainly wouldn't call this a cleaver, but who really gives a shit about blade style names? Nobody can agree on anything anymore. It's 2024. You know, nobody's ever going to agree on anything, so who cares? Flat grind. Handle length is 7.5 inches. They're saying the handle material is polymer. It's a G10. That's clearly a G10, but okay, polymer, whatever. Fully aggressively skeletonized steel liners in this sucker. So G10 and steel liners, I mean, they are skeletonized, but it is heavy. It is very, very heavy. Not only is it a very massive knife with those materials, but this blade itself is so stout. Camera's not exactly doing it justice. You really got to get one of these things in person to really fully understand how broad these blades actually are. I think this is easily the widest, biggest, fattest blade I've ever seen cold steel put on a folding knife of this size, period. The Espada is already very big, but this guy trumps it. It's massive. It's a very, very wide blade, and its weight, according to Blade HQ, is coming in at 13 ounces even. It is fully ambidextrous. We have the typical cold steel pocket clip you see, although it looks like it's got a tumbled finish on there rather than being blackened. Oh well, it's pretty sexy looking. Just like all the others, it comes with a second one that is attachable to the left side. We have the dual thumb studs on here. The spine actuating Atlas locking mechanism is ambidextrous, so it is a fully ambidextrous folding knife. Thank you very much. Made in Taiwan. Let's just weigh this guy. Again, they're saying 13 ounces. My scale says 12.98 ounces. So I'll just take their word for it, just about 13 ounces. Cool. So why do I like this knife so much in comparison to the other giant cold steels? I mean, don't get me wrong, I love them all. But first off, the looks. I mean, it's sheer aesthetics. I melt for this particular design. I love this blade style, the clip cleaver, whatever the hell you want to call it, modified something or other bullshit. I don't know. It's a really, really cool blade. It's obviously very good for piercing. This is where the whole clip point comes in. I would call it a clip point, maybe a modified clip point. I mean, this portion of the spine, the way its smiley faces in like that, the little slope, and then it protrudes upwards right here, so we have some extra strength, but then it tapers back down to become a clip blade. So we have a decent amount of strength here. We have very good piercing capability. We have good belly on here. It's a really, really cool looking blade. Then aesthetic milling on top of here. I mean, that's not really going to be useful for anything, but I like the design cold steel puts on a lot of their blades. It's really awesome. It's just really, really cool. I love the really fat ass actuated blade in comparison to the relatively skinny handle we have going on here. Don't get me wrong, it's a very big handle still, but in comparison, you can see that the handle, minus this guard, the bolster area, it's a lot skinnier compared to the blade. I love that. I melt for that design, that really actuated looking blade. I love the double choils we got going here. It's kind of like the Cold Steel Recon 1 treatment where they have 2 choils up here. The rest is kind of just a gradual slope, not too many crazy choils or anything. So I wouldn't call it an extremely ergonomic handle with like a million choils or anything like that, but it's ergonomic enough and very, very ergonomic. We have a third one down here for the combat or the full reach grip. I love the two-tone G10, the black and the light gray. A lot of nods given to aesthetics on this knife in particular. So on top of the fact that it's super broad, it's super wide, huge and heavy and actuated, we have the Atlas lock. Now, if you're not really familiar, I do have a video on how this works in depth, but essentially it's much, much faster and has the fidget factor in comparison to the Triad lock. So we can open and close this guy without touching the blade at all. If you're familiar with the Cold Steel Engage series, it's kind of like the Cold Steel Engage on steroids. We have the Atlas lock on this guy. We have a dual pin system right here. We have one stop pin right here on the left. That's going to absorb most of our positive force going on the cutting edge. It's stopped by the stop pin, just like any other locking mechanism. But the second stop pin right there stops this lock bar right here on the top, and that is also stopped. You can't really see the internal of it, but on the bottom of this lock bar that's sliding, it rests on top of the bottom of the tang of the blade right there. And then the top of the lock bar rests on top of that second stop pin on the right, while resting underneath both of the stop pins. It's a very integral, interesting, powerful locking mechanism. In fact, Cold Steel claims it actually carries more weight than the Triad lock can. Now, the Triad lock is notoriously one of the strongest folding locking mechanisms for knives in the world. And apparently this locking mechanism actually can hold more weight than the Triad lock. I believe it simply because of the dual pin system. We essentially have a metal bar underneath here resting itself on top of the cutout and the tang of the blade right there, sandwiched in between those two, and then overlapped by itself, while the top of the tang of the blade is also overlapping the second stop, and it's a very, very powerful locking mechanism. So it can hold more weight than the Triad lock, so it is arguably stronger than the Triad lock, although I have seen a video where somebody wailed on a Cold Steel Engage in comparison to another Cold Steel knife that had the Triad lock. After batoning with both of them, unfortunately, the one with the Atlas lock actually started developing some play. It kind of sounded like that. I'm just pulling back on the locking mechanism. It basically sounded like there was a little bit of room in there. There's an internal spring inside of the locking mechanism that's housed right there by that screw. You can't see it because it's internal, but that's what springs this sucker back into place. So I feel like what was happening was all of that shock, despite this locking mechanism, again, being able to hold more weight than the Triad lock, I still don't think it can withstand as much shock as the Triad lock can. The Triad lock is just more simple, and it uses a torsion bar rather than a torsion spring. From what I've seen, from my research, and from my own experience, torsion bars are able to withstand more shock than springs. It does depend on how they're manufactured, engineered, understood, but generally speaking, that's kind of just a rule of thumb. So I feel like because of that spring in there, it's just not as strong as the Triad lock, but it can hold more weight than the Triad lock can, so it's kind of comparable in a way. It's not really a winner or a loser in comparison to the Triad lock, I don't think. It's still a very, very, very strong locking mechanism. In fact, I would say it's still stronger than the Benchmade Axis lock series and all the Axis clones coming out these days. It's stronger than those, and it still has the fidget factor extremely fast because you can relieve the tension of it without touching the blade. It's just not side actuating, it's spine actuating, so something different. Now, I wouldn't recommend you do this. Don't swing this knife open and close. Personally, I just wanted to, because it's so massive. It's such a big, broad, heavy 6-inch razor sharp blade. I wouldn't do what I'm doing right here. Okay, I'm just messing around, and I'm under very controlled circumstances right now. Personally, I don't recommend you do that, but you certainly could if you want to do. I'm not going to stop you. Just do it at your own risk. It's just not as small and fidget factor friendly as like the Engage series. It's a massive Engage on steroids, essentially, is what we have here, but it still has that speed, so you can still flick this sucker open arguably a little bit easier and faster than a knife about this size with a Triad lock, because there's just less tension on there. So that is the advantage we have of the Atlas lock. And again, it's arguably stronger in some ways than the Triad lock. Personally, I don't need all that strength. I mean, it's still really, 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 really strong. Don't get me wrong, but I don't need all of the strength that the Triad lock has. I like the novelty of that. I like the fact that the Triad lock is so strong. It's just cool. The Cold Steels are really, really cool for that. But this is just about as strong. It's very, very close, I think, overall, and it's got faster speed. So personally, this is my favorite locking mechanism period. It's the Atlas lock, and it's on top of one of my favorite knives ever. Easily my favorite cold steel knife, easily. Ergonomics are great. Whole lot of different positions you can hold it in, just like a lot of their larger folding knives. I love the way it looks. Very angular geometrical designs in the bolster area, as you can see right there. But then we have some gradual slopes for our organic fingers. It's very technical and geometrical, but at the same time very ergonomic and round and curved. It's a really, really interesting design. I've never quite seen anything like it. And I love that blade. Hot damn, that is sexy. I love this blade design. It's really aggressive and modern looking, but it's very, very functional. It's not a gimmick either. It totally is going to be great for piercing. It's going to be really strong. It's going to be great for chopping, slashing, all that stuff. It's a fighting blade. Absolutely a fighting blade. Very good defensive weapon right here. It is very wide. It looks kind of just like any other XL cold steel knife when you just see it on camera like this. I promise you, it's got a very, very wide surface area right here. So I'm always kind of in shock. Every time I open this up, I realize how far away that thumb stud is from my thumb. It's because it's so wide. Kind of looks like a little Reese's peanut butter cup shape on there. It's like a cone with the top cut off, so not a bad design. Kind of wish they were even wider. I would like some like really fat thumb studs. That would be kind of cool, honestly. But you can see how close they are to making contact on the bolster area right there, so I'm not gonna bother to critique that. It's smooth. It's fast, it's extremely strong, it's very ergonomic. We have medium traction on the G10 handle scales right here. I love how these pins are nice and flush mounted in there. It looks good, it's technical, it's powerful. Bead blasted finish, that looks so cool. I love the bead blasted finish on the Atlas lock bar right there, and then the jimping they got on there. It's very, very easy to get to, works every single time. So again, do that at your own risk. If you're gonna flick this open and close because of its fidget factor, by all means, go for it, but I'm not recommending you do that. That's just from me to you. Carries just fine. It's heavy, you know, just under 13 ounces. It's a very, very heavy knife, but for the speed and the strength you're getting here, I think that's totally worth it. I mean, it's such upper, look how, it's a massive, massively fat blade. So that's totally reasonable. And again, they did aggressively skeletonize those liners, and you can see all those holes. So there's even like a last little hole they have at the very, very tips right there. It's a very, very nice touch. Maybe they didn't even need the steel liners. You could have just gotten away with probably straight up G10. But then again, I feel like it wouldn't have been as balanced without the liners. Maybe we want a little extra weight in there because that blade is so massive. G10 typically is strong enough. It's amazing how strong that material actually is. It's extremely dense. But again, it probably would have been extremely blade heavy if we did not have those liners in there. Maybe, I don't really know what their logic was behind it, but I like them. I like how it's a big, heavy, broad, substantial knife. It's just cool. You could probably choke up all the way up here if you wanted to. Use those spine cutouts for jimping. I suppose you can kind of dig the tip of your thumb into one of those if you really needed to choke up, but it's not very comfortable in this position. It doesn't look like it's meant to be held that way. You probably choke up here. That's a little bit more manageable. Not the greatest position ever, but whatever. There's our standard grip. Cool. Extremely comfortable, works very well. There's kind of a mid-tier grip you can do right here. Yeah, not bad. We can scooch all the way down there, take advantage of that final choil down there. That's a lot of reach we have. We got a little lanyard hole right there, just like most of the cold steels. We have a backspacer. This looks like it's layered up. Maybe it's a G10. Maybe it's a G10 backspacer. That'd be cool. I love the bead blasting on the liners as well. Almost like a matte gray going with that black. It's just sexy. It's really good looking. Again, two-tone finish for the satin on the blade. We have horizontal striations going that way, vertical on the grind right there. So we got speed, we got strength, fidget factor, sort of. It's ambidextrous. It is very heavy, but it is devastating. We got a nice traction plan on here. It's a defensive blade. It's a defensive martial fighting blade, and it is a little bit obnoxiously heavy and wide. It's not my first choice as a fighting blade. It's very, very wide and heavy, and I think it's really cool. Again, it's my favorite cold steel to date. But if I were to pick a knife, I would still probably go with something closer to like the Espada large G10. It's slightly shorter, slightly smaller, but it's a little bit less wide. We have a triad lock. You can wave that off of your pocket. It's just a little bit more simple, a little bit more friendly, a little bit more compact, a little bit easier to control. This guy's really wide and broad. I know that seems intentional. It's supposed to be just a massive, massive knife, and it is awesome for that. But it's a little clumsy. I know that when I try to open and close this guy, even with that Atlas lock, again, the thumb stud being so far away, you really got to just make a conscious decision to do that. It's just so damn wide. It's a really, 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 really wide, heavy knife. But we get a lot back for that, so that I'm not complaining. It's just something to keep in mind. If you were seriously considering this as a defensive blade, it'll absolutely work, hell yeah. I think there's technically slightly better options out there as far as cold steel is concerned, but this this is still a great option. Again, we have the Atlas lock, so that means speed. So we'll certainly beat the Triad lock as far as that's concerned. Now, as for like an outdoorsman's knife, this would probably work pretty well too, but again, I would still go with something like maybe the XL Voyager for something like that. Or like the XL Recon wands back when they sold those things, because this Atlas lock is not designed to be wailed on. Like, I would not baton with this. Again, from that one video, seeing what happened to the Engaged, it could develop play. That spring in there, even if this area is really strong and can hold a lot of weight, that spring tanking in all that shock, it may or may not do all that well. I'm not really sure. I don't want to test it on this knife myself, but I'm just going to take that video's word for it. So very good looking, really cool, really wide, really fast, really strong, beautiful. And the AUS 10A blade, so I didn't really touch upon it, but I've said this many, many, many times in all the videos on the cold steel knives. It is what it is. It's a good medium grade blade steel. It's certainly better than AUS 8A, which is what they used back in the day. And it will help keep costs down. You know, if you get these for like the $140 range, really, really great knife, home run. For like $240, I honestly think that's a little bit expensive. Because again, if you were to compare this to like the large cold steel Espada, which is just slightly smaller than this, but same blade steel, basically all the same materials, it's just that one is wearing the Triad lock rather than the Atlas lock. That one goes for like 110, something like that. Basically twice the price just because you're getting that Atlas lock on there and slightly more material, despite everything being the same materials. It's just a little expensive. It's slightly expensive, but you know what? I still think it's worth it, despite not being a great value. Unless you can get it for like 140 bucks, then no complaints there. So anyway, that is it. That is the Cold Steel Mayhem. I've been dying to get my hands on one of these things for years. I saw the prototype flash just a couple of years ago. I think it was like 2022 or something. And it was supposed to come out that year, and then it didn't happen, and then I heard something about the next year it was supposed to come out, and then that didn't happen either, and now it finally has come out. And I finally found it for a pretty reasonable price. So excited for this thing. I absolutely love this knife. What do you think of this knife, if you have it? Are there any advantages and or disadvantages to it that I failed to mention in this video? Do you despise this knife? What do you think of the blade steel? What do you think of the Atlas lock? What are your thoughts on the Cold Steel Mayhem? Please let me know in the comments down below. It's always interesting to hear what you guys have to say, and I always learn something from you. Thank you so much for watching. Mannix out.